Every region has its own history of plant-based edibles and medicinals, and while traveling through Tucson, I had the chance to take an ethnobotanical tour through the Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum to learn about some of their native medicinal and edible plants, which I'd like to share with you here.
My name is Manuel Garcia. I'm a conservation research associate at the Arizona-Sonora Desert Museum. We are in one of the richest deserts in the world, one of the most diverse deserts in the world. Almost tropical desert, if you want to call it. It's a very interesting aspect of it. So the diversity of plants has always been connected with the diversity of people in the region. And along with the diversity of people is the diversity of languages, the diversity of traditions, and the diversity of uses of these plants. So whether you are looking at an indigenous group right here in the Tucson area, or if you go down into Sonora, which is part of what the museum interprets as a regional part of the Sonoran Desert, the uses, the traditional knowledge in connection with people is tremendous. So you can almost connect every plant to some sort of practice that people would use for shelter, weapons, tools, food, medicine, clothing, instruments. You can almost go along about any cultural practice that any indigenous group would use, and a plant will be there to solve that problem. Well, this is an iconic plant. This is one of my favorite plants, and this is probably a plant that Tucsonans absolutely love and talk about every chance they have, because this is the plant that is probably responsible for one of those sensory ways of describing the Sonoran Desert. You might have heard in expressions, of course, a few colleagues here in Tucson have written books where they say the desert smells like rain. That is a unique expression because when we have this period of drought, starting right now, usually starts in March, April, May, and most of June, where not a single drop of rain comes to the desert, and humidity is absolutely zero. Then the monsoons come. So imagine most of these desert plants have been longing for a drop of rain. We're talking about 3 or 4 months, totally dry. All of a sudden there's a monsoon, and these plants open their stomachs. They all of a sudden just like exposed transpiration happens in the desert, and the humidity just overwhelms the environment of Tucson. And anybody who was born or raised in Tucson and they went away, the one thing they miss is the smell of this plant. And this plant is called creosote. Creosote is a ubiquitous plant. You just find it all over the place. It's one of the most adapted plants here in the Sonoran Desert. Also, is very well known for being a medicinal plant. And we kind of get into an interesting aspect of understanding a medicinal plant, because at the same time, this plant is poisonous. So sometimes I have a little piece like this and I give it to somebody and say, oh yeah, this is a very poisonous plant. And they just, they drop it. Well, the reality is that this plant is being so adapted to living actually in all the deserts of North America. You can find this plant all the way into South America. There's other species down in South America, but here it's almost found in every desert of North America here. And the chemical components of it have been well adapted to these extreme conditions that we have. The Sonoran Desert probably exists, and it is what it is based on the extreme conditions. It's too cold, too hot, too wet, and too dry. If we didn't have those conditions, these plants in this environment would not exist. So this plant is perfectly adapted to those conditions, not only to maybe keep predators away, potential animals that would eat it, but the toxins on these plants are so powerful that a lot of animals don't eat it. Very few insects will attack them and eat them. Therefore, those tremendous amounts of chemicals that are there are actually very good antibiotics. They're antifungal. They are historically, by the Tohono O'odham, the Native Americans live in this area, and many long-term Mexicans that have lived here for 300 years, they've used this plant as an antibiotic. For instance, if you have an open wound, you cut yourself, and you have an open wound, and you don't have access to any antibiotic you would get in a pharmacy or a doctor, you simply make a tea out of this. and that would kill any bacteria, any viruses, any microbes that would infect your wound, and you heal. Traditionally, when I was a kid, I grew up knowing that when we had an animal, a dog, a cat, a horse, a mule, a donkey that would have some kind of a wound, first thing you do, make a tea out of creosote and wash the wound. And within, you wash it 2-3 times, in a period of a week, and the animal will heal. Essentially, is an antibiotic. Probably the coolest thing of this, the kids love to hear about this, is, you know how teenagers often have stinky feet? I don't know why, but I guess that's what happens. Well, it's traditionally used also to cure any athlete's foot or any type of stinky feet problems, because what it is simply fungi that loves to live in your wet, dirty, sweaty feet. And especially when you don't change your socks regularly. Well, if you put a piece of creosote in your shoes and go to school or walk or do your business, you end up killing the fungi in your feet, or simply make a tea and wash your feet. It will kill the fungi that is attacking your feet. So this is a perfect example of a plant that is well adapted to these extreme conditions, yet is incredibly beneficial for humans. And of course, one of the things that I started talking at the beginning is the smell. You either love it or hate it. So for those of us who have lived here in the desert, and you grew up with this smell,
It smells almost a little bit like, like the new plastic in a pool.
it is a unique, pungent kind of smell, resinous, and yet it's something that is so close to us that we just simply love it. It's part of our culture here, because there are plants all over the place. And again, the flower is really beautiful this time of the year. The pollinators are all over the place. Some of the wood is used for firewood. It's kind of a hard, thin but hard wood that is used for firewood and other things. So it is a plant that is very important, almost like a keystone here in the Sonoran Desert. So here we're sending in another very, very unique plant to the Sonoran Desert, because it's a plant that is so present everywhere along with the saguaros, along with creosote, and along with some other legumes. This prickly plant here, which is not a cactus, is definitely a succulent, but it's a plant that is so common throughout the Sonoran Desert, and this time of the year is the time to see it. In his glamour in many different ways. This plant right now is, as you can see, this is actually our fall colors right here, is dropping the leaves, because this plant responds not to the cold and the heat, it responds to the dry and the wet. When the rains come, whether it's winter or summer rains, within 24 hours, this plant will leaf out. Within 24 hours, you start seeing leaves coming out. And as soon as the water, let's say the rains and the moisture starts disappearing, the leaves start dropping. And that's what we see right now. A few leaves are left behind here. But probably one of the amazing things for this time of the year is this. Look at this. Let's follow this branch right here. And brings us to this beautiful inflorescence. This is the Ocotillo flower. So the Ocotillo, it's a plant that probably many people have used it over the years, because it's very utilitarian. You can make fences, you can make chicken coops, you can make houses, you can make all kinds of things to protect your animals if you live in a rural area. But particularly the fun thing about fences is that if you build fences, and many people have done over the years here, and you plant them, they tend to grow fairly easy from cuttings. So the fence becomes a living fence. Yeah, the Ocotillo comes alive. But as I was mentioning, this time of the year is a very unique place, because this is something that reminds me of my childhood. When the Ocotillos are blooming, which is in the spring, like right now, and the inflorescence is completely full, it open like this. Most of this, you can tell, is almost done. There's a few little buds, flower buds that haven't opened yet. But as a kid, I would do this, lower the branch, find a little of the flowers, pull the stamens out like this, and then enjoy a teeny tiny bit of sugar. We're talking about a tiny little drop of nectar. But since there are 20, 30 flowers, well, let's do another one. So you do another one.
The hummingbirds,
look at this. Oh, there's plenty for the hummingbirds. So this is something that a little kid growing up in rural areas where you had no access to candy, that's as much candy you would get, okay? Now, The Seri Indians down in Sonora, they would cut the entire inflorescence and put it in a container with water overnight. What are you getting out of that?
Well, you're getting like a sugar water.
You're getting a super drink. You're getting
Yeah.
a powered drink.
Yeah, 'cause
Not
you
like,
get the pollen and you get everything.
look at
from
the
it,
pollen.
too.
See my fingers
Yeah.
right now? Every one of these flowers has a tremendous amount of pollen.
Mm-hmm.
The pollen and a little bit of nectar
Yeah.
and maybe a few bugs that are in there
Mm-hmm.
create a super drink that in the next morning you enjoy a glass of water with the most amazing flavor and nutrients that otherwise you wouldn't get by doing that. So now here's another interesting thing about this flower. Notice the shape. If you look at it from any angle, particularly when you look it up like this, it does have a flame-like shape, okay? So that's actually related to the name of the plant. So the word is Ocotillo, and the word comes from a Spanish word taken from the Nahuatl that is called ocote. The word ocote refers to a torch, and typically a torch that is made out of a particular pine tree. So in Nahuatl, in the language of the Aztecs, they refer to certain pine trees as ocotes because they are rich in resins and they can make torches with them. So essentially an ocote is a torch. Now if we add the word illo, which is a diminutive in Spanish for the word, for any word, and you say instead of ocote, you say ocotillo, guess what it means? Little torch.
Yeah.
And every single one of these branches resembles a mini torch, and that's the origin of the word ocotillo, which is not really Spanish, it's actually Nahuatl. But again, it's another plant that is very useful. Often people would harvest just the mature stems and the plant stays alive. So the rest of the plant continues to grow and you can utilize these materials for housing. The native people have used them for housing for millennia, as well as fences and chicken coops and things like that. Again, we're getting into the realm of eating, not necessarily medicine, but here's where things blend in. You know, what plants can be useful for food, but what plants can be useful for medicinal or tools and utensils and things like that. But this is another really unique plant that connects us to the southern part of the Sonoran Desert. So you might have heard already that this region of Arizona is almost like the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Sonoran Desert biodiversity. So the Sonoran Desert is found in the state of southern Arizona, southern California, the state of Sonora, and the entire peninsula of Baja California. Those 5 states basically are the main geographic area that basically makes the Sonoran Desert as it is. However, there's a lot of plants that only exist in the southern end of the Sonoran Desert. Some of them barely make it into Arizona due to climatic conditions. You know, it's either too cold or too dry or too wet or different things. But this is another plant that is so unique in the Sonoran Desert. As soon as you cross the border, in some cases actually even before you cross the border, you go to Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument, which is in the US side. But once you get into the state of Sonora, Mexico, there is this beautiful, gorgeous columnar cacti that I would consider, you know, in terms of importance here, it's kind of like a number 2 after the saguaro. The saguaro being the iconic plant here in the Sonoran Desert. Organ pipe is a very, very important plant economically, nutritionally, culturally, because this plant, like many other cacti, the fruit is very tasty. It's very delicious. It's very abundant. Unfortunately, we are barely starting to see some buds. It's just about to start blooming. This is overall, it's a young specimen. But once they start blooming, just like the saguaros, they open and then they open during the day. Many pollinators like bats and bees and birds also come in them. But the fruit is one of the most delicious.
Tastes like,
Is uniquely. Have you ever had saguaro fruit or any other?
I've had a puntia, which to me is like a very like a sweeter version of like a watermelon.
It's kind of like that. I almost think of, I guess, fig Newtons, if you want to say, but it's almost like a fig, but not really. It has a more of a very unique cactus taste, tremendous amount of sugar, very, very tasty, lots of seeds that you can. If you ever had dragon fruit,
Yes, dragon
that's
fruit,
probably,
yes.
but sweeter with a more cactus desert taste, and it's absolutely amazing. Not only you can eat them,
dessert.
desert dessert, you got it. So you can eat them fresh, which is typically what people do. You get up really early in the morning, usually starting mid-June. That's when they start ripening. There are special tools, however, that because notice how high they are and how prickly they are. You cannot harvest them by hand. The same thing as saguaros. You have to have a long pole, knock them down, and catch them in a basket. This is slightly the opposite. The fruit is very round, unlike saguaro, it's more oval. It's very, very delicate. If you knock it down, it squishes and you lose it. You have to harvest it with a tool that you poke it, bring it down, clean the spines. When the fruit is ripe, the spines fall by themselves almost. So it's all kind of like, it comes with the time and the ripeness and knowing how to do it. Once you peel it, and it's like the most delicious, and more if you cool it down, you put it in the refrigerator and cool it down. You can make syrups, you can make turnovers, you can make desserts, you can make all kinds of things, or simply eat them fresh. It's just absolutely amazing. So this is another thing that many people in the Sonoran Desert look forward to every year. The other downside of this is, this along the saguaro and the Oregon pipe, they produce in the hottest, driest time of the year. We're talking about, in Fahrenheit, 117, in some cases 120 degrees at the ground level. So hot, so dry. That's when these fruits produce. And then often that opens up the season for the rains. The beginning of July, that's when the monsoons come. And this is an excuse for the Tohono O'odham and the people from the region to celebrate kind of like the beginning of the year, because all of a sudden the rains come, life begins, the cycle begins again. So those extreme conditions really culminate with the dry season, the production of columnar cacti fruit, and you have a party, essentially, celebrations. Okay, so here's another plant that probably has become way more popular in recent years, particularly here in Tucson. Several books have written about it already. This is the famous mesquite, Prosopis species that we have here in the desert. It's very, very common. We have at least 3 species. This is the most common. This is the velvet mesquite. It does have a little kind of velvety feel to it in the leaves. It's a legume, and it's very, very, very common, and it tends to be a fairly large tree.
Now, are these the past flowers? Are they catkins, or what are they?
Of catkins, that would be the closest way to put them. And then these become long, long beans, elongated long beans that I would say in another month and a half, they'll be ready.
And as a legume, is it a nitrogen fixer?
Absolutely, like all legumes are. And people are starting to consider this plant, not only that it already is been used forever for everything. You can almost consider it another Árbol de las Maravillas, another tree of marvels, because it's used for firewood, construction, medicine, food. You can just a tremendous amount of things. The wood is very hard. It's a really great wood for barbecuing.
And tell me about like how it looks like it had been burned, like this look of it.
If you look at the bark of these trees, often they will be shedding. I can show you a little here. They've been shedding some of the sap that comes out, and it's this black sap that comes out, and often it just drips down. It looks like it's been burned, but no, that's the normal color. Occasionally, when it's been pruned or it's been kind of cut by itself, a branch is being cut up, the sap comes out.
So it like saps out like a pine in a way.
Like a pine. The dark one is not very good, but check this out. Sometimes, I don't see it that much. There is a amber color sap, very tiny. Unfortunately, there is later in the summer, we get to see this very amber looking, and that's delicious. You can actually eat it.
You have a sweet tooth.
Yes.
Like already topped.
Well, actually, and this is not particularly sweet, but it is a unique flavor that.
Pungent?
No, it's just a very earthy flavor that you ask any Native Americans or the old timers who grew up eating this amber looking sap, they describe it sweet. It's actually, think about,
I guess mesquite barbecue. Like when you think of mesquite barbecue, it has that kind of like sweetness to it, but not in the same way. Smoky and sweet, yeah.
Either the wood, or in some cases people use the beans that you can throw in the barbecue while you're cooking whatever you're cooking. It will give that smokiness to it, and that's the mesquite barbecue aspect of it. But once the beans are ripe and they're dry. You can collect them off the tree, then you grind them and turn them into flour. That is the magic word there. For gastronomy, mesquite flour is being used and continues to be used in a tremendous amount of dishes, from tortillas, waffles, pancakes, muffins, cookies. No matter what is your favorite baking goods that you do, you can always add a percentage of this flour. It doesn't have gluten. You have to mix it with other wheat or corn or other things, and you can create amazing numbers of dishes, and it does have a unique mesquite taste to it. That's again something that is very common. People are embracing tremendously this. The flour is available in the stores, even here in Tucson. So that's a sign that people are catching on to the idea of a wild desert plant all of a sudden becoming mainstream when it comes to eating local foods. And of course, in terms of medicine, there are many aspects like the sap. It was used for wounds and things like that. The new shoots, like if you had an animal or a person who got constipated for whatever reason, the new shoots, if you make a tea out of this, it will give you diarrhea. So, I mean, which in some cases could be good. But besides shade, besides firewood, construction materials, ramadas, structures that are built in the desert are typically done with mesquite wood. And it's just another tree that is just a blessing here in the desert. Okay, so here we have another unique Sonoran Desert plant, and this one is called the foothills Palo Verde. And Palo Verde, as you know, in Spanish means green tree. Palo refers to a tree, and green is a green tree. And why is it green? Well, you said, well, all trees are green. Hello. Well, this is a unique green. First of all, look at the different shades of greens that we have in the Sonoran Desert. The shades of green are absolutely amazing, whatever you look in the desert. Now, this tree in particular has a very unique pale green color. And not only the leaves, which actually this one has very, very tiny leaves. Let's see if I can show you some. They are so tiny, you can barely see them. Look at that. Actually, there, man, they are so tiny. There, right there. Those are the tiny leaves of Palo Verde, and they are deciduous. They do drop them when it gets really, really dry. But the most unique thing about this, here is a concept in biology that any person who studies plant biology will tell you. Plants need surface area to produce photosynthesis, is the name of the game. So in the desert, you cannot afford to have big tropical leaves because they will get sunburned. Even if it's a native plant, they will get sunburned. The sun is so intense, it will kill them. So what is the strategy of a plant like this and like many other desert plants? Reduce the amount and reduce the size of the leaves, particularly. Well, this guy went to extremes by reducing leaves so tiny that you're going to say, well, what kind of a photosynthesis is going to happen in these tiny leaves? Well, whatever happens is good enough, but the bark is prepared to create photosynthesis as it needs. So the entire bark of a tree, from the bottom to the top, no matter how thick it is green, and it has cells to produce photosynthesis. So this is another unique adaptation besides very likely a taproot. A lot of these legumes tend to survive also because they have a taproot. They have a very long root that they get into moisture that is often very deep underground. And here they are. They can be 2, 3, 4 months with no rain whatsoever. And look at this, starting to bloom. This is just the beginning of the blooming. These are all buds. They are not open yet, but when they open, they are bright yellow, the most beautiful yellow. As a matter of fact, in the Tohono O'odham language, this month, which is part of March and April, they call it the yellow month, is the part of the year when the desert turns yellow. Not just the Palo Verdes, Bristle Bush, many wildflowers around, they all turn yellow. It's the color of the desert because most of our flowers are composite. So we have a tremendous amount of species. They're all composite and they all happen to be yellow. Now this plant is another very unique plant to the Tucson area here, particularly to the Arizona uplands. This is a very unique bush too. This is really not a tree, it's really a bush. And if you take a little close look, we actually have fruit happening right here. Look at those beautiful nuts. They look like acorns, but they're not. So this is actually a nut. And of course, this is the female tree that, let's see if I can peel one for a second. Of course, it's not ripe, but you can see the fruit and the nut being produced right in there. And when they are ripe, they drop this little skin, and they have this little brown, right now it's white, but it's a little brown flower. Excuse me, this is a brown nut, brown embryo of the nut that many animals eat them. Humans can eat them too, but they're not really recommended to eat because you can eat one or two. They're actually pretty tasty, and more so if you roast them. But they have a tremendous amount of oils and wax that is not very easy to digest. So if you eat a lot of them, you could potentially get sick. One or two are perfectly fine. But this is food that many animals would eat here in the desert. This happens to be a female. And next door, we happen to have, oh no, it's a female too. The males are probably somewhere around there. Okay, here's a male. Here's a male. So right across the street, right here, here we have a male.
The girl next door.
The girl next door, you got it. In this case, this is the boy next door.
Yeah.
So look at this cluster of flowers. So every little cluster may have about a dozen or 15 teeny tiny flowers. And so this is the male, no fruit in the male. Very likely, based on the anatomy and the position of the leaves, notice they are typically standing, which is a strategy to stand heat. They are slightly twisted. So that's another strategy to handle the hot sun throughout the summer. And very likely when wind comes in, whirls around the plant, carries the pollen just a distance, short distance like this, and the female looks exactly the same, except it's just one flower. That one flower gets pollinated, and that one flower provides the one fruit. So pretty cool. It's a nice little love story here of jojobas at the Desert Museum. So this is one of my favorites too. This is a plant that is dear to me because whenever you often hear about Mexico or Mexican culture, nopales, the word nopales comes into the picture because Mexicans are well known to eat cactus. And typically the cactus that you would eat is nopales, prickly pear. And the cool thing about this, look at this beautiful color. I mean, speaking of yellow colors in the desert. So this is a perfect example of some flowers already open. Some of the buds are just starting to open right here. But typically in this particular plant, notice the amount of spines that they have. And those are the ones that you can see. If you get a little closer, if you pay attention to some of the fruits right here and look closer to those bottom of those spines, underneath there are thousands of teeny tiny microscopic spines called glochids. And those are nasty. You do not see them, but you feel them. So it is very, very important when it's time to harvest this thing, because most people think about how in the world can you be eating this prickly thing that is just completely covered by thousands, in this case probably millions of glochids. Well, people have always figured out a way of living in their environment. The way animals have done always, people have done the same thing. So when the fruit is ripe, which is typically by early to mid-August, this is right into the rainy season, the fruit will ripen and it turns into this beautiful purple, wonderful color. And they are still, however, full of glochids. So what you would do is come around nearby, collect whatever material is available, in this case, a little bit of creosote, you see how handy it is, and you would come and clean the fruit like this. Look at this. Look how easy it is to remove the glochids out of it. Once you do that, you can literally by hand collect the fruit, and then you clean it back again. That's safe. That's how, of course, this fruit is not ripe right now, but this is how you would do it. I have removed 95% of the spines and the glochids out of this fruit. If the fruit was ripe, I would be ready to eat it, just like that. So in this case, of course, it's a bud. However, this bud also can be eaten because, yes, I would rinse it a little more, but why is this bud very helpful to eat? Because it's already about to open just like those flowers. This bud is about 2 days before it opens. Nectar and pollen is already produced in there. So if you cook this bud and eat it, You're eating the nutrients of the pollen and the nectar that is about to be offered to the pollinators. So humans figure that out, that if you eat this fresh, unopened bud, whether it's a prickly pear or a choya, which we're going to talk about next, you have an amazing staple food here of the people of the desert. And this is the fruit. But what about if you want to eat the pads? You might have heard the word nopalitos before. So nopalitos, again, this is the time of the year to do that. Notice this is a large plant. There are some old pads and there are some new pads. Let me show you if I can show you right here. Here's a new one right there. This is an example. That is considered a nopalito, meaning young, small, tender, prickly pear. So again, you can literally lean down, pick up a couple of sticks that you would find. I do not want to touch it with my hands because it's completely full of spine. So you can either hold it like this, and then of course you use a knife or something like that. You harvest the nopalito, and enough to, if I can get it, there. Okay, my little stick is there. So I'm going to put this rock right here. Look at that. So yes, you can tell that it's completely covered with spines. Typically, people don't eat this variety of prickly pear because this is a wild variety. This is Engelmann's prickly pear, Opuntia engelmanni. Most cacti are not really poisonous that they can kill you. They just don't taste good. And this time of the year, if you really had to, like in an emergency, and you're hungry and you want to eat something, you could eat this, but yet you have to go through this. So what you do, you use a knife, hold it like this, and clean every single one of these things. Look at that. In a matter of minutes, if not seconds, you remove these spines and glockets like that. So you do that, and then of course you will rinse it, and then you do the other side. And this is how you would essentially, in a matter of seconds, clean a little pad like this. Of course, you want to use a fork or other things, and then by rinsing it, you can simply remove whatever is left. Here I'm removing 90% of these glockets. If I cut it like this, now since I cleaned it a little bit right here, I can clean it, cut the edges. Okay. So if we had a little bit of water, this is actually pretty tasty. When it's young and tender like this, there's not as much oxalic acid. The fibers are minimum, and it tastes like green beans.
Is it mucilaginous in any kind of capacity?
Yes.
Like an okra kind of?
And no. When they are young, you might get a couple of little things in your mouth there, but that's going to be your introduction to the Sonoran Desert. Yes, there is mucilaginous aspect, more so in the old ones. The new ones don't have it as much. Doesn't it taste like a green bean?
Yeah, it also has
Now imagine eating them with scrambled eggs, with chile colorado, put them in a salad, and obviously you would clean them a lot better, and
it
so
does
you have
a little bit of a mucilaginous.
I mean all cactus have.
Yeah, but not anything.
But the mucilaginous stuff is good for you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So anyway, now keep in mind this is a wild variety. Needs no attention whatsoever. No watering, no attention, and they will fruit and flower beautiful every year. Humans, however, have figured out that you can domesticate some of these plants, and down in Mexico for thousands of years, they've done it. So there are other varieties of prickly pear that are spineless, that are bigger, that are better tasting, which is called the Indian fig cactus or the Opuntia ficus indica, that they get much bigger. These are easier to clean, better tasting, grow faster, and they're more accessible. So simple as that. If you have the option, you don't go for this one, you go for the other one. Simple as that. Okay, since we're talking about staples, this is another one that for many, many years here at the Desert Museum, in conjunction with many of the Native Americans that live here in this area, have also been part of teaching how to harvest choya buds. This is another cactus that is also very, very important for the region. This is called choya, or also Cylindropuntia is the genus. And at one point it used to be Opuntia, and then it got changed to Cylindropuntia. But again, we're talking about eating not the fruit, like we're talking about prickly pear. We're talking about eating the flower but not the flower when it's open, the flower when it's closed. So if you pay attention to this, notice this flower is open, but this one is not open yet. That's what is called a Choya bud. And a Choya bud is the staple for Native Americans for millennia. Again, they figure out that by removing the spines, making sure that the pollen and nectar is still in there, and you harvest that bud 2 days, a day before it opens, the nutrition value in this product is amazing. Is incredible. Yes, you have to also harvest it. And let me once again, this is kind of like my motto. If you're in the middle of the desert and literally you lean down, which I'm going to do about right now, and find, in this case, look at this, a couple of little pieces of the same Choya skeleton. I make myself a chopstick, and then I can come in here and get one of these buds right here and then just twist it. There. I got the Choya bud, and let me put it right in here. So look at this. This Choya bud, it's again a flower that is about to open in a couple of days. It's about ready to open. So now I need to clean it. What do? I need to go find a piece of creosote right here. The same thing. Grab a little tiny piece of creosote, and I can hold it a little bit here, but I can hit it like this. Look at this. Just by hitting it. I can do this sometimes when it's still in the plant, but by doing that, I have removed most of the plants, the spines, yeah. I have removed just about all the spines. Yeah, look at that. Now, by doing this, not only I get to smell the creosote while I'm doing this, but look at that. That is literally all the spines have been removed. Why is it good about this plant? That the buds, again, if I open one, look at that. Nectar and pollen is already about to be ready to be offered to the pollinators. But what do humans figure out? You can eat it. Again, it's another very unique tasting. Let me get one for you here. So let me clean. I'm gonna clean this. See, if I do it before I harvest it, it's even easier. So I just hit it. Most of the spines are gone. If you don't want to use your hands, in this case, I could actually use my hands. But if you don't want to do that, I come and use my little chopstick that I just did. So again, I hold it like this and break it out of the plant there. So I got my plant here. Let me clean it up right here. Those spines, as menacing as they look, basically they disappear in a few seconds. There. And then those little ones that you see there are actually not hard. They're very, very tiny. So how about that? How about if you eat it?
Yeah, how about that?
This is also somewhat mucilaginous, but it's part of this cactus flavor that is basically what makes them survive in the desert, and is what makes them thrive. And also it's a low glycemic index type of food that Native people have been eating for thousands of years. And there are more and more people, particularly young people now, concerned about their diet. Diabetes is a big problem in Native American populations. And learning and going back to the old ways, it makes a huge difference in their life, in their diet, in their culture. So by the fact that these plants are still here, they're all around us, everywhere, every season. And not only that we start paying attention to the seasons, we look at the beautiful colors, we know when they are available, but also how to process them, how to clean them. If you collect, I don't know, several dozens of these, you can clean them, you can steam them, you can dry them, and keep them for 6 months and eat them 6 months later. Because you dry them, you dehydrate them, you rehydrate them, and you prepare them and eat them. So this is a staple food of this part of the world. This is another iconic plant in the spring here in Tucson. It's so unique because you have the green ashy color leaves, and then you have this probably about a foot long inflorescence that comes out of this bush, and this is called brittle bush. Brittle bush It's just found almost all over the desert, and it's one of these responsible plants that turn the desert yellow. This is another composite. This is another one of the beautiful composites. It has a kind of a unique smell. As a matter of fact, the Spanish name for this plant is called incienso, or incense. And why is it called incense? It turns out that underneath, when we look underneath this plant, throughout the stems, and you kind of have to look around, look at this yellow sap coming out. See these little pieces of yellow sap? Yeah. Look at that. That is a very gooey yellow sap that comes out. And this one is a little gooey right now, but if you get it at the right time, and if you just collect bits and pieces here and there, and then you put it in your mouth, it turns into gum. The A'atam people call it A'atam gum. And this is something that I grew up with too, because I learned it in Sonora. Growing up as a kid, you're running around in the desert, in the mountains, and whenever you find a brittle bush, you would go and find if there is this a little tiny hardened piece of, like in this case, yeah, really tiny hardened piece of sap. And so you put it in your mouth, and then you go walk around a little more, and then you find another one, and then you put another piece, and you put it in your mouth. Literally, it's like gum. You can chew it. Like? It tastes like a very mild resin. It's not sweet by all means. It's a resin kind of smell, but very mild. You eat it, it's like gum. You can chew it for 2 hours. And when you get tired of chewing it, you put it in your pocket, and then an hour later, you put it out, get it out again, and then continue chewing. It's amazing. It's really, really amazing. And this is something that, I mean, as a kid, when you learn about some of these plants that give you these little pleasures, you just never forget these plants. And you learn to respect them, you learn to see them, you learn to pay attention to them, you learn to notice them. And I think the case for any environment, whether it's the desert or the mountains or the jungles, acknowledging and being able to tell apart a plant for a particular reason, I think is fascinating. It's just the best connection humans can have to any environment by saying, okay, you know what? This plant, I know it because I get pleasure out of it, either by looking at it or by eating it or by playing with it, or in some cases, certain plants, you can make tools with them, so you know that they're useful. And I think overall that's, oh, here's a really nice piece. Let me show you. Oh my gosh, it's so cool. Let's see if I can grab this piece. Oh, darn. Oh, that was a really big piece and I lost. Anyway, so there are just like chunks of this yellow sap that you just look for it, and you know, it's like a little game. So.
If you'd like to see more of our Sonoran Desert tour and native and desert dwelling plants, you can visit our sister channel, Plant One On Me. In the meantime, tune back and hear for more content from Flock. Hit the like, subscribe, notifications button, and even tip. 10% of our Google AdSense proceeds are reinvested back into the Finger Lakes community, and that's matched by our partners over at Espoma Organic. So your viewership and support really makes a difference, and we thank you for that. We'll see you in the next video.